So the next section we're going to look at is circles. So a circle can be written in different forms. We have our standard form, and the standard form tells us a lot about the circle and will help us graph it. So the standard form of a circle is in the form parentheses x minus h quantity squared plus parentheses y minus k and parentheses that quantity squared is equal to r squared. When it's in this form, we can tell what the center is. So the center, so h and k are constants, and we're going to take the opposite sign. And so center is going to be h comma k. So it has x minus h here. And so h is the x value of the center. If it had been plus, then we would use negative of the h. The radius, this is equal to r. So we need to take the square root of what the other side is to get what r is. The unit circle, this is used a lot in trig. The unit circle is x squared plus y squared equals 1. So notice that we're not adding any constant and then squaring it to the x or subtracting. Same thing with a y. And so our center is 0, 0, the origin. And the radius is the square root of 1, which is just 1. So let's say it asked us to graph the circle x minus 2 quantity squared plus y plus 2 quantity squared is equal to 4. So looking at this, you want to find your center. H and K, opposite signs. So it's going to be positive 2 for the x value of the center and negative 2 for the y value of the center. We know r squared equals 4, and we're talking about distance, so r is equal to 2. So it's pretty simple to graph where your center is. So I have a point at 2, negative 2. And then from there, we know that the radius is 2. So radius is the distance between the center and the circumference of the circle. And so if we go up 2 units, that's going to give us a point on the circumference. If we go to the left 2 units, that's going to give us a point on the circumference. We can go down 2 units and to the right 2 units. And so that gives us 4 points on the circle. And we can now draw the best we can, the circle. And so this would be the graph of this circle. Okay, so I can see, because of this circle, what my x and my y intercepts are. But let's say it wanted us to solve it or show this mathematically. If I was trying to find the x-intercept, recall we let y equals 0 and solve for x. Oops, I said y, finding the x-intercept. So let's go in here into our equation. We have x minus 2 quantity squared plus 0 plus 2 quantity squared equals 4. So x minus 2 quantity squared plus, well, 0 plus 2 is 2, 2 squared is 4, equals 4. If I subtract 4 on both sides, x minus 2 quantity squared equals 0. square root method. If I take the square root of both sides, doesn't matter, plus or minus the square root of 0 still gives me 0. And the square root of x minus 2 quantity squared is just x minus 2. And so x is equal to 2. So that was the x-intercept, and we could see up here that that was a 0.20. So similarly, we could do for the y-intercept. We're going to let x equal 0. And we'll solve for y. And so doing that, we got 0 minus 2, or negative 2 squared, plus y plus 2, quantity squared equals 4. Well, squaring negative 2 is positive 4, because that's negative 2 times negative 2. Subtract 4 on both sides. We get y plus 2 quantity squared equals 0. Take the square root of both sides. We get y plus 2 equals 0. And y is negative 2, which we could see right here. So you should be able to find your x and your y intercepts of a circle. You should be able to graph it once it's in standard form. And once it's in standard form, you should be able to identify what the center and the radius is. Okay, so they're not always in the standard form. And sometimes they're in what is called the general form. The general form of a circle this is where we have x squared plus y squared plus, let's say, ax plus by plus c equals 0. Okay, so this isn't in the form that we can tell what the center or the radius is. And so we want to put it into standard form. So once we get this, we need to put in standard form. Find the center and the radius. Notice that that general form, let me back up here. We had a perfect square for our x terms plus a perfect square for our y terms. And so recall we were making perfect squares before by completing the square. So we are going to need to do that to take our general form of a circle and put it into standard form. So let's look at an example where we need to do that and go over again how to complete the square. So let's say we had x squared plus y squared plus 4x plus 2y minus 20 equals 0. So find the center, find the radius of the circle, and graph the circle. Find the intercepts, if any. First thing that I do is group your x terms together because we want a perfect square with our x terms. Group our y terms together because we want a perfect square with our y terms, and then get that constant on the other side. So I'm just going to rewrite this equation. So we have x squared plus 4x. Let's add some room here because remember we added something to make a perfect square. And so I'm going to put plus right here. with a little line under it because we'll figure out what that needs to be in a second. Then we have plus y squared plus 2y. I know I'm going to add something to the y terms to make that a perfect square, is equal to, well, let's get that constant on the other side. So we have to add 20 to both sides. But if we added something to the x terms to get a perfect square, in order to make it equivalent equations, we got to add it to the other side. Same thing with the y terms. Okay, so we're looking for the number. That same number we can add to give us 4. So we always just have to that. And so 4 divided by 2 is 2. And if you took that number and multiplied it together, this is what we're adding. So this was 4. So recall once our a value had to be 1 in front of our x squares, which they are. So we looked at b divided by 2 squared. That was the number that we added. So I need to add 4 on this side. So I want to rewrite, and actually let's, before we rewrite the other piece, let's bring this down. So this right here is x plus 2 quantity squared. Okay, so let's manipulate y plus 2y. Let's add something in there to make that a perfect square. So if we half our b value, so 2 divided by 2 is 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. And now we have to look at 1 times 1. So that's 1 that we're adding to both sides. And so that perfect square for our y values, the same number that multiplies to give us 1 and adds to give us 2 is 1. So we have y plus 1 quantity squared is equal to 25. So here's our standard form. Now you should be able to identify what the center is. Opposite signs. So our h value is going to be a -2, and our k value of the center is -1. Our radius squared is 25. So our radius is 5. They wanted us to graph. So I'm going to go to left 2 and down 1. And my center, from my center, I'm going to go up, down, left, and right 5 to get points on my circle. Okay, so if I go down 5, that's going to be, give me a point at -2, -6. If I go to the right 5, so adding 5 from -2, that's going to give me 3. -1. If I go up 5, so going up from -1, up 5, that would be the point -2, 4. And to the left 5, so going to the left of -2, that y value or x value is going to be -7. -1. And so we got our circle. So just looking at this circle, I can tell I'm crossing the x-axis twice, and I can tell I'm crossing the y-axis twice. It wanted us to find the x and the y-intercepts. So if we look at the x-intercepts, we're letting y equal 0. So if we do that, we have this x plus 2 quantity squared plus putting 0 in for y, I get 1 squared equals 25. So I have x plus 2 quantity squared equals, well, this is 1. I need to move that 1 over to the other side. So 20, sorry, that was 25. I'm doing it in my head right now. So subtracting 1 from 25 is 24. We want to take the square root of both sides. So we get x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 24. Let's subtract 2 on both sides, but square root of 24 breaks down. There's a perfect square. That's a factor of 24, 4 times 6. So the square root of 4 is 2. Pull out the 2, root 6. So those are our x-intercepts. The y-intercepts, we're going to let x equal 0. Let x equals 0. We're left with 2 squared plus y plus 1 quantity squared equals 25. 2 squared is 4. So I have 4 plus y plus 1 quantity squared equals 25. Isolate the perfect square and use the square root method. So we have y plus 1 quantity squared equals 21. Take the square root of both sides. We get y plus 1 equals plus or minus root 21. And subtract 1 on both sides. So y is equal to -1 plus or minus the square root of 21. 21 doesn't have any factors. That is a perfect square. Okay, so if I was to graph this and I had to graph this, I would probably make sure, or let's just look at this. Let's look at -2 minus 2 square roots of 6. So my y, or my x value, is approximately -6.9. Let's look at -2 plus 2 root 6. And I get approximately 2.3. No, sorry, 2.9. So my circle's a little off. And it could be just my intervals. But -6.9, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's a little off, but I'm in the right general area. I would probably do the same thing. Sorry, I was doing my y's. That could be y. So 2.9, that looks good. And what did I say? -6.9, so 6.9 looks pretty good. And -1 plus root 21. So y is approximately 3.6. 1, 2, 3, that's about 3.6. And y is approximately -1 minus root 21, which is -5.6. Which we had gotten about when we did down here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's -6. Okay, so I told you that we were going to get back into completing the square, and we're going to be doing this even more in the course when we look at graphing parabolas, ellipses, hyperbolas. Okay, so one more example. We're given that the center is 0 or 1, 0, and we're given that the circle contains the point -3, 2. And we want to find the equation. So we need to use this information. We have x minus h quantity squared plus y minus k quantity squared equals r squared. So we actually know what h is. Now we know what k is. And so if we go back in there and plug in those values, we would have x minus 1 quantity squared plus y minus 0 quantity squared, so y squared equals r squared. So there's two different ways to approach figuring out what r is, our radius. Well, if we know the center and we know a point on the circle, then we know that this distance between the center and the point is our radius. So we can use that and find the distance between those 2 points. Or we know a point, so we could plug in our x and our y value into this equation that we have and solve for r. So if I went in and I plugged in -3, so I have -3 minus 1 quantity squared plus, plug in my y value, 2 quantity squared, this is equal to r squared. So this is -4 quantity squared, which is 16, plus 2 quantity squared, which is 4, is equal to r squared. So 20 equals r squared. So actually, I could stop there because I want to put it in this form and I need what r squared is. And so I know my center or my circle is, equation of my circle is x minus 1 quantity squared plus y squared equals 20. And so we found the equation of the circle with the given information.